Darkcast Network, indie pods with a dark side.
Hi, my name is Bonnie, and my sister Danielle Bell has been missing since September 28th, 2001 from Cantonment, Florida, or Escambia County, Florida.
Hello, and welcome back to Fuck That. This week, I am getting into the disappearance of Danielle Bell, which includes parts of my interview with her sister Bonnie. But before I get into the episode, I wanted to give a trigger warning. This episode will discuss sexual assault against a minor in detail. Danielle Arion Bell went missing on Friday, September 28th, 2001 from Cantonment, Florida. Cantonment is a small town in the northwestern corner of Florida, just outside of Pensacola. Danielle's older sister Bonnie has been advocating for her sister's case for years, pushing local law enforcement to conduct a proper investigation, which they failed to do initially. Danielle was born on July 28th, 1987. She was 14 years old and was attending Tate High School when she disappeared. Danielle was a cheerleader, she loved to dance, and was loved in her community. Danielle lived with her mother at her grandmother's home at the time. Bonnie was 20 and was attending college when her little sister went missing. Bonnie, can you tell the audience about Danielle?
So my sister was 6 years younger than me. She was the youngest of three. She grew up in what I would describe as a pretty volatile household, yet she still was very optimistic, happy as a kid. She enjoyed typical things like little ones enjoy, like coloring, and one of her main passions was cheerleading, which she did starting at the age of 5 all the way until she disappeared at 14 years old. One of the ways I could best describe my relationship with her, we shared a room for the entire time she was around, and we used to watch Daria on MTV, and she used to tell me all the time, Bonnie, you're Daria and I'm Quinn. And if you're not familiar with the show, Quinn's like the popular, outgoing, happy one, and Daria is kind of like a little goth, a little melodramatic sometimes, melancholy. So that's one of the best ways I would describe the difference between her and I, and our relationship was great. Growing up, she was really bonded with my mom. She was like my mom's little pal, and my mom treated her very much as a friend instead of a child, which, we can get into later. But I think the most important part for people to understand about my sister is that she was a compassionate, caring individual. She loved animals. She was outgoing, popular. She could carry a conversation with anyone. And by the time she was like 10, 11, 12, I was driving. So she would follow me around. Well, I was in high school and hang out with me and my friends, where we spent a lot of time like on the beach or doing water activities on the bay, whether that's canoeing or paddle boating. And so we grew close during that time. And even before she went missing, I would get her often and take her to the beach on the weekends. And she had a lot of friends. Those are the best ways I can describe her.
One of the things that stood out to me when I was reading through a lot of the news articles that you sent me, and, this is decades ago when she went missing, is that people were commenting in one of the articles from just a couple of years ago about how fondly they remembered her, what a beautiful, pleasant, kind person she was. And there were dozens of those comments, and that was something that I thought was really moving.
Yeah, I've seen those comments and they're all accurate. Yeah, for sure. And it's nice to see those. North Escambia News does a really good job of updating on her case, and the comments from the locals there are really heartwarming to see.
Danielle disappeared on the evening of Friday, September 28th, 2001. She was last seen at 588 Cedar Tree Lane in Cantonment, which was the home of a 24-year-old man by the name of Robert Bassett Jr. Robert Louis Bassett Jr. was close friends with a man named ALFREDO SANCHEZ, and he was born on December 12, 1976. Robert's friend ALFREDO was born just one day before Robert, on December 11th. How sweet. ALFREDO SANCHEZ, who was also 24 years old at the time, was involved in an inappropriate sexual relationship with Danielle. Again, she was 14. On the night of the 28th, there was a party that initially began at a local park before moving to Robert's home. The party obviously had several minors in attendance. And if you're curious as to why two 24-year-old men were having a party with minors, I am too. According to friends and family close to Danielle, she was introduced to ALFREDO through his cousin Roel, who was also a fully grown adult male. Roel was dating one of Danielle's friends who was her age. Are you noticing a common trend here? Witnesses stated that they left the party that night and that Danielle had stayed behind with Robert, who allegedly began to threaten people after Danielle disappeared. Robert was later arrested on unrelated charges after Danielle's disappearance, but he was never charged in connection with her case. After his arrest, authorities searched his home, but have never publicly stated whether or not they collected any evidence. But in my opinion, murder is not something that could be out of character for somebody like Robert. Since Danielle's disappearance, he has been arrested for several incidences of violence against women. I am going to read from a news article from northescambia.com that is linked in the show notes regarding Robert Bassett Jr. Robert Louis Bassett Jr., age 43, was charged with 2 counts of felony aggravated battery causing bodily harm, battery, 2 counts of criminal mischief with property damage, burglary of a residence, and multiple violations of domestic violence injunctions. The article further states that an adult female told the local county sheriff's office that he punched her 6 or 7 times in the face during a disturbance over $40. In another incident, he forced his way into a room at a local inn, shoving a door into a female before punching her multiple times in the face. He then continued to hit her with a wooden chair. As for ALFREDO SANCHEZ, the man that was inappropriately having a relationship with Danielle, he disappeared for 3 weeks after her disappearance. ALFREDO's shitty actions caught up to him slightly when he was first arrested in September of 2005 for a sexual relationship with a minor whose name I'm going to leave out of this episode. What do you think happened to Danielle?
So my sister went missing on September 28, 2001. And the last place she was seen was at 588 Cedar Tree Lane, which is the home of Robert Bassett, who is best friends with ALFREDO SANCHEZ, who is currently serving 40 years in prison for 2 counts of lewd and lascivious behavior, one of those counts being for my sister. And I say that because what I think happened that night at that party was that my sister was gang raped and I believe murdered, and that ALFREDO SANCHEZ and Robert Bassett know what happened to her. I think that my sister had developed a relationship with ALFREDO SANCHEZ based on the premise that it was okay, given by my mother, because my mother was actively getting her drug supply from ALFREDO SANCHEZ. And I believe that my mother knew more than she let on, or at the very least, she was getting her drug fix in exchange for a blind eye to my sister being sexually involved with ALFREDO SANCHEZ.
When you mention case files, it's not through the local police department, correct? It's another agency. I'm curious if you could speak on the agency outside of that did an investigation into your sister's disappearance, particularly how you were able to figure out that relationship between your sister and your mom and ALFREDO.
Yeah, so the agency at the time, I want to clarify something, okay? Brad Dennis used to be the executive director of Class Kids Foundation, which was under Mark Class. He doesn't work there anymore, and I don't want to give Class Kids the credit for the work. I want to give Brad Dennis the work. Does that make sense? July of 2019, I was working late and I hear a knock at my door and my dog's going crazy. It's like 2 a.m. and my mom's on my patio. And my partner at the time had seen her be dropped off by the police. And so I asked my mom, like, what's going on? And she basically said she had gotten into an argument with her boyfriend, who I've later found out was her pimp, and that he beat her. And at that time, I was so angry with her because of the repetitiveness of her lies and her addiction and the impacts that it had on us, her kids, and her complete disregard for that, right? So I told her, I was like, you can stay here for like the night, but you got to go in the morning. She ended up staying a night and a half. And then she left the next day. And the last thing she said to me is, it's pretty obvious you don't want me here. I'm going to go stay with a friend of mine. And that was the last time I saw her. And then I started getting phone calls from people that she had gone completely over the edge, basically like trying to scam people out of money for her addiction. And one of those phone calls was that she was prostituting. And I knew that if I was getting phone calls, like it had gotten bad, like really bad, right? In addition to that, my uncle received a call from a U-Haul rental place that she had rented a U-Haul truck, put him down as a reference, and didn't bring it back. Well, I called her once I found out about the prostitution and confronted her about it. I said, my understanding is that you have been prostituting and that there's a rumor that you've been with somebody who's HIV positive. You need to get checked out. And secondly, I know that this matches the information in the case files about my sister. Do not ever contact me again. And so the phone calls kept coming still. So I found her in this rental truck at the Queen Mary Inn on Davis Highway in Pensacola, Florida. And she was strung out of her mind. The truck was parked there, and I saw her walking back carrying like a bag from a convenience store, and she was tweaking out. I didn't say anything to her. I just sat in my car and left. I went and talked to Brad Dennis, who's led massive amounts of searches for my sister, ground searches. And he took a picture of my mom to the hotel and asked the front desk if they had seen her. And they said, yes, as a matter of fact, we kicked her out because she had had so many men in and out of this hotel. This was one of those motels where you rented it by the hour. That's how bad it was. So after that, I went and reported it to the police. The police said they'd bring her in for questioning. Never did. And then she passed away in October of 2020. My mom was terrible. She's terrible. I just remember before she passed and watching her do interviews and being questioned by like the police, or mainly watching her be questioned by the search and rescue teams, really. I mean, those were the people that really did the first amount of legwork, but her tell those stories over and over again, and to justify her not calling the police for 2 days, to me speaks volumes. You know, I remember just sitting there listening to her talk about it and just thinking to myself, gosh, this makes zero sense. This makes zero sense to me. How could you? I knew she was not the best mother, but I didn't even really know about her addiction problems until I was probably in my like mid 20s, early 20s, is when I was mature enough to understand it at that point, right? And then looking back, I'll never forget the day that I verified through Brad Dennis that she was at that motel prostituting, and feeling like it all came together to me at that moment. It all made sense. And at that moment, I knew I would never be the same person. And the idea that your own mother could do that is mind boggling to me still. And I grew up with her, right? Like, Yeah, she was terrible. She never got up and made like breakfast. She certainly wasn't the mother that was going to coddle you or do anything for you. It was an extremely neglectful, emotionally abusive relationship. And I would say that even knowing those things, I was so shocked, but it all made sense. It all just made sense. It's always hard for me. I want to be able to tell my sister's story in the most authentic way possible without making other people feel bad. But at the end of the day, there's still things I'm trying to work through. My stepdad was an alcoholic. My sister was put into a terrible situation. Me and my siblings were put into a terrible situation. There are days that I wish someone would have stepped in and taken us because neither of them deserved kids. Really, they weren't capable of doing it. There are times, I was already gone out of the house I left immediately as soon as I could just to get away from the violence. And there was absolutely no love in that house. There was no love. It was a straighten yourself up. No one cares about your feelings and do what I said. My stepdad had the mindset of women and children were to be spoken to, not to speak up. I mean, I remember that being said often. I remember just my early childhood before my sister was even born, the amount of violence that was around. It was an extremely volatile situation. So I think when you combine that with the lack of supervision, because my parents separated in 2000, my stepdad, which is Danielle's dad, and my mom divorced. So my sister was left with just my mom. I think that she would have been better off with my stepdad at that point. He eventually got his stuff together. This has really been difficult for him. But at the end of the day, I think when you have those combinations, yeah, you're going to get a child that's at risk. I mean, she matches some of the signs of high risk youth for trafficking, right? Like the age range, the home life. I mean, and people in my sister's side of that family would probably not honor that type of situation, like not honor the fact that she came from that situation because it makes him look bad. But at the end of the day, I think that's a factor that needs to be stated and it needs to be looked at because when you look at it, you can see the neglect and abuse that my mother instilled upon her or that she was in with my mom that led to this event. Not saying that it's their fault per se, but I think what I would want people to take from it as a parent is that watch what you're doing. Watch how you're talking to your kid. Watch how you're treating them. If you're going to continuously dismiss them, if you're going to continuously put them in harm's way and not create a safe environment, what the hell do you think is going to happen? What kind of little people do you think you're going to create from that situation? And so, yeah, I still have a lot of anger and blame for both of them, but specifically my mother. At the end of the day, my stepdad is a good guy. I know that sounds hard saying that, but these incidents where the violence was mainly when he was drinking, but at the same time, that boomer mentality, suck it up and deal with it.
According to court documents filed in 2015 on ALFREDO Sanchez's behalf, on October 14, 2005, Sanchez was charged in the circuit court in Escambia County, Florida, with one count of unlawful activity with a minor, with the offenses occurring between October 1, 2002 and September 7, 2003. This was the first time that ALFREDO was mentioned that I referenced earlier in the episode, and I think that this means that he has obviously continued to assault minors after Danielle's disappearance, which to me shows absolutely no remorse or reflection on his behavior. On December 14, 2005, Sanchez was charged again with one count of lewd or lascivious battery, which meant that the victim was over 12 but under 16 years, and one count of lewd or lascivious molestation, with the offenses occurring between May 1, 2001 and September 27, 2001. These are the charges that were placed against Sanchez due to his assault of Danielle, who was 14 at the time. For those charges, ALFREDO agreed to enter a plea of nolo contendere to the charges and was sentenced to 15 years with a pre-sentence credit of 329 days for the first case and 15 years with a credit of 373 days for count 1 in Danielle's case and 15 years for the second count in that case, which would run concurrently. Sanchez appealed the judgment, which was affirmed, and then in June of 2010, he filed for a motion to reduce or modify his sentence, which was denied. Sanchez then filed for post-conviction relief twice before filing a federal habeas action in 2014. To sum it up, he was requesting a review of the validity of his conviction and sentence because, according to him, his counsel failed to file a motion to dismiss charges based on the expired statute of limitations. Sanchez believed that if he had known about the statute of limitations, he would not have entered in his plea and would have wanted to go to trial. But once again, this petition was denied. I'm going to get into the statute of limitations argument a little bit later on, but first I want to discuss a lot of the information that was in this petition. ALFREDO Sanchez was arrested on November 22nd of 2005 for what he did to Danielle. He claimed that he only admitted his sexual relationship with Danielle to police in 2001 because they told him that they were only interested in her disappearance, not in their relationship. I would argue that both of these go hand in hand and that Sanchez is full of shit. The whole premise of his argument is that if he did in fact admit to this in 2001 and not a couple of years later to police, that would have meant that the statute of limitations would have expired. Court documents demonstrated that while police were investigating Danielle's disappearance, it was during that investigation that Sanchez's crimes were uncovered. According to a report conducted by Mark Smeester, who was a former investigator for the Escambia County Sheriff's Office, who took over the case in 2005, quote, ECSO Officer Frank Fillingham investigated the victim's disappearance initially for 1 week in 2001. Officer Jimmy James subsequently took over investigating the disappearance. In 2002, the defendant, Sanchez, submitted 2 polygraph tests on 2 occasions, which were both administered by Officer John Tyndall with inconclusive results. On June 29, 2004, Officers Thomas Orr and Chris Baggett took over the investigation and again interviewed the defendant. In this interview, defendant admitted that he had a sexual relationship with the victim, but defendant was not arrested at that time. In 2005, when Officer Mark Smeester took over the investigation, his report summarizing the interviews that he conducted notably included the following information that he had gathered. 1. Defendant admitted to having sex with the victim. 2. Robert Bassett, friend of defendant, stated that he was aware of the sexual relationship between defendant and the victim. 3. The father of the victim stated that he was aware of the sexual relationship between defendant and the victim. 4. Susan Bell, mother of the victim, provided police with myriad information. And then in parentheses, it talks about how the report indicated that Susan Bell provided a notebook to investigator Smeester, and she described in her own writing what she remembered regarding the case. Then it continues to say, quote, and stated that she was aware of the sexual relationship between defendant and the victim. She also stated that she and the victim's uncle had confronted defendant about the sexual relationship several months prior to the disappearance, and that she was aware that the victim believed she was pregnant with defendant's child. The following names I'm going to keep redacted because they were underage when this investigation took place, and they were friends of the victim, and I want to maintain their privacy. One of the friends of the victim stated that she was aware of the sexual relationship between defendant and the victim and had observed them having sexual activity. 6. Friend of the victim stated that she was aware of the sexual relationship between defendant and the victim. 7. Friend of the victim stated that she was aware of the sexual relationship between defendant and the victim and of the victim's possible pregnancy with defendant's child. She stated that she had seen defendant and the victim engage in fondling and passionate kissing on at least 20 separate occasions. 8. Friend of the victim stated that she was aware of the sexual relationship between defendant and the victim and the victim's possible pregnancy with defendant's child. 9. friend of the victim who spoke to the victim on the phone shortly before her disappearance, stated that she was aware of the sexual relationship between defendant and the victim and of the victim's possible pregnancy with defendant's child. 10. Neighbor stated that she was aware of the sexual relationship between defendant and the victim. 11. Uncle of the victim stated that he was aware of the sexual relationship between defendant and the victim, and he had confronted defendant with the victim's mother about the sexual relationship a few months prior to her disappearance. He also stated that he had spoken to an investigator prior to Mark Smeester about the incident involving the confrontation. 12. Friend of the victim stated that he was aware of the sexual relationship between defendant and the victim. And finally, 13, another friend of the victim, stated that she was aware of the sexual relationship between defendant and the victim, and also stated that everyone was aware of the sexual relationship between defendant and the victim. One of the first questions I had when I was reading through these documents was, why was ALFREDO SANCHEZ not charged when he initially admitted this to police? Regardless of whether or not he actually did admit it in 2001 or if he's just lying for that statute of limitations is regardless, because he definitely admitted it in 2004 according to court documents, and he wasn't charged until 2005. And if you're wondering that as well, I can answer that question for you. The petition states that according to the woman who deposed Officer Orr and Officer Bassett, quote, they did not charge the defendant in 2004 after he admitted to sexual activity to them, basically because they were busy and got distracted. End quote. Investigator Smeester testified that the investigation involving Danielle Bell began in 2001 initially as a missing persons investigation, and it wasn't until later that it became a sex case investigation sometime in June of 2004, and this was due to the fact that ALFREDO SANCHEZ reported to investigator Orr that he had sexual contact with Danielle Bell, and yet charges were not filed until over a year later. Additionally, according to court documents, one of her friends told investigator Smeester on November 2, 2005, that Danielle had told him in August or September of 2001, right before she disappeared, that she was gang raped by SANCHEZ and some of his friends. In case you're wondering whether what Bonnie said she thought happened had any substantiation behind it, I think this is clear-cut evidence of that. This friend also stated that he had previously reported this information to an investigator who was accompanied by Susan, Danielle's mother. But there is no mention of an interview with this friend and investigator Orr. Unfortunately, this is a very common theme throughout this petition. There are several instances of witnesses and SANCHEZ himself stating that he told law enforcement about his relationship with Danielle prior to 2004. Now again, it would be self-serving for SANCHEZ to admit this because then his statute of limitations claim could have merit in this petition, but putting aside that asshat's claims, I found this section of the response to be very compelling. Quote, the state court's determination that it appears that a motion to dismiss based on the expiration of the statute of limitations would have had merit was not based upon any direct evidence that law enforcement knew about petitioner's sexual activity prior to December 14, 2002. Rather, the court opined that because all of the information obtained by investigator Smeester in 2005 was available and highly relevant to the missing persons investigation, which commenced in late September or early October of 2001, it seems highly unlikely that out of all of these independent witnesses, many who were presumably previously interviewed by Officer James or perhaps Officer Fillingham, no one ever mentioned that she, Danielle Bell, was having a sexual relationship with defendant and or that she may have been pregnant with his child. Again, I can't help but wonder why wasn't ALFREDO SANCHEZ arrested when he first admitted to police that he had a sexual relationship with Danielle, whether it was in 2001 or 2004. That is a crime in and of itself, and in my opinion, could very well be a motive to make sure that Danielle can't disclose their relationship to anyone and get him in trouble. And court records show that Danielle believed she was pregnant with ALFREDO's child, and according to Bonnie, there is evidence that ALFREDO did not want that child, and that he threatened Danielle because of this. To me, whether or not there is a body or not in this case, These are clear-cut motives as to what could have happened to Danielle that night. And in my eyes, it's something very ominous.
So, characteristically, I think my mom turned a blind eye, and then the verifying that she was a prostitute matched the witness statements in case files about my sister's case. So that's what I think happened. I think she was buried. There's been rumors that she has been chopped up and put into a hog pen. I don't know where her body is, but I know there is one somewhere in the greater Gulf Coast area, and that's what I'm, trying to do is find it. My mom, to paint a picture for you of how the person she was, I mean, she was doing drugs with me when I was 15. We were doing cocaine together when I was 18. So I know for a fact that she engaged in drugs with her kids, and she had no regard for her own life, let alone others. Ultimately, she died in October of 2020 by high on meth, squatting in an apartment. And when the police showed up to get her out, she jumped off the third-story building, off the balcony, and died on impact. It was ruled a suicide, but she had extremely high amounts of methamphetamines and Adderall in her system. And I believe, she was out of her mind and didn't know what was happening and just fled.
As of the date of this recording, Danielle is still missing, endangered, with foul play suspected. Bonnie is trying to work with authorities to solve her sister's case, but in the most recent communication between Bonnie and Escambia, they could not provide her with the 911 call her mother made on Sunday, September 30th, nor could they provide her with information as to what happened to that 911 call.
So I recently made a trip back to Florida. I left in 2019, in 2020. Once I found out about my mom, I just had to get out of there. So currently, when I went back to Escambia County, before I went, I reached out to the sheriff's department and said, hey, I have questions. Over the years, I know the volatile relationship that you had with Susan, which my mom caused all kinds of craziness with the case. And I wonder why now, right? I had a meeting with them, and they are going to be providing me with some public records requests. We are on what I'm calling a 90-day, journey here, where they will be reviewing my sister's case by putting a group together that will get together, once a week. And it's made up of maybe patrolmen that are interested in investigations, but it's going to be getting looked at.
ALFREDO SANCHEZ is in jail, but his current release date is set for March 5th of 2046. Robert Bassett Jr. is also in prison, and his release date is troublingly soon, December 27th, 2025.
I am making a push on social media, mainly TikTok, to tell her story. I am trying to take her story national because I have spoken to other people that are in law enforcement removed from my sister's case. And after looking at the evidence, they have told me that they believe that the only thing, that there's just one more piece, and it's the body. We just need the body. And no one believes that she's alive. I certainly don't. And so I just would say, engaging with her Facebook page, Missing Child Danielle Bell. If you're on TikTok, you can follow me, A Lesbian Calling Out Grapes. And I'm sharing all of the podcasts, all of the lives, all of the creator content that I am trying to get and work with other creators to do. And so that's the biggest thing, is engaging with that. Keep sharing her story if you come across it, engaging with it. And also, if you go to my profile on TikTok, I have a petition in there that is to move my sister's case from the Escambia County jurisdiction to the state level. And the state level, I think, has more resources. Once they do this 90-day review based on whatever comes of that, If I think it needs another review, I'm going to keep pushing for that. And so my goal is to take it national.
If you know anything about the disappearance of Danielle Bell or the individuals I just mentioned in connection with her case, please contact Escambia County Sheriff's Office at 850-436-9620. I believe, and Bonnie believes, that somebody out there knows what happened to Danielle. And while it might be scary to think about coming forward and giving this information to police because of how dangerous the people that were last seen with Danielle are, ALFREDO and Robert will continue to hurt people when they get out of prison. Danielle deserves justice. Her sister Bonnie deserves justice, closure, and peace. If you want more of me and my pod, F That Pod on Patreon. If you also liked what you heard, please like, review, subscribe. You can find me on all social media at F That Pod except for Instagram, fthat_pod. I'm on YouTube, F That Pod, and the website is fthatpod.com. Love you, bye.